Hello, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's exciting to see you as well. And what a great time to be in Matthew. We just had Jesus calm a storm. So I don't know what storms are in your life, but I'm sure that Jesus would come and calm those as well.
Yeah.
So today we're going to go back into demons. One of the things that we talked about was very prevalent. We already had a session discussing demons and what it meant to rabbinic and first century Jews. And over here is just another classic demon story. And I guess, Isaac, I don't know, is this story well known in Christian circles that they talk about these two demons and the tombs and the pig, or it's not really talked about that much?
I think it's mainly glossed over because again, demons brings request a whole different world. And my impression is, or what I've gathered so far is these passages are just they're glossed over. Like Jesus did something, things went out, or probably it's also used to prove that there is a world outside of what we see, that there is an invisible world, or to draw some of these, to use these verses to draw some of those, or to highlight some of these differences and to drive a few theological points as Jesus is God over the physical world and also this unseen world. But that may or may not be, again, so this passage is so broad, it's glossed over, and then they tend to draw different types of inferences.
Okay, so yeah, it's interesting. I guess as a Jew, I don't always know where it is that Christians have focus, but this feels like a story that would be glossed over just because there's not a clear moral message. It's almost a not a metaphysical message, but a magical, like zombie-like message that Jesus is also able to do that. Okay, but at the end of the day, we're only going to do the first verse today. So we're not even going to really touch that much upon the demons. So let's get started.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 8, verse 28. And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two demon possessed men met him, coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way.
Okay. So we'll focus on the demons in the future. I want to focus on something that probably no Christian really thinks about. We know that Jesus was either running away or for whatever reason was in the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee, even today, is the border for many things. During the 1967 war, because the Golan Heights is right next to the Sea of Galilee, one of the reasons that Israel was forced to take control of the Golan Heights is because the Syrian armies were shooting down at it from a high point. And if you ever go to the Golan Heights, you could see the whole Sea of Galilee. You could almost, if you have a good marksman, you could shoot almost anyone in that whole area. But historically, a lot of times as we know, the Jordan and the Sea of Galilee was the separation point between Judea or Galilee and other countries. And over here in the New Testament, this is called Gadarenes. Other places, it's called Gergesuni, which is paralleling one of the seven Canaanite nations. But in the, end of the day, one thing we could be sure of is that this is not what we would call today Israel, not part of the Jewish land anymore. One of the reasons this is probably listed as not part of the Jewish lands, because when we read the story, we see that there's pigs. Jews and pigs don't get along. We'll talk about that momentarily, but we see
That's
that in verse 31 that there's a herd of swine. So what I'd like to talk to you today about, and I think it's something that again you probably never really thought about, is Jesus allowed to leave Israel, and why does he leave Israel? So the simple answer is we have some pigs. And Judaism, as I mentioned, has an aversion to pigs. If you look in the Mishnah in Baba Kama 7:7, I'll read you a fast version. We could talk about it. It says it's forbidden to rear small herd animals in the land of Israel, but it's permitted to rear them in Syria. This would be Syria, this area, or in the wilderness of the land of Israel. And it goes on, it's forbidden to rear fowls in Jerusalem because of the holy things. Nor may priests rear them anywhere in the land of Israel because of laws concerning clean foods. And last, it is forbidden to rear pigs anywhere. So a long-standing rule is that Jews not only don't eat pigs, but they don't raise them. It may not be forbidden biblically to raise pigs, but the sense is that if Jews shouldn't really be involved in pigs, if anything, a lot of times Christian community takes it sometimes, or the Muslim community definitely takes it more seriously. Like you can't touch pigskin and you can't be involved. So I don't think Jews have that aversion to touching, but the idea is that you don't have pigs available. And in the archaeological record, a lot of times when you see that there are pig bones in certain areas, you know that's like not a Judean encampment. So from a simple perspective, why does Jesus have to leave the standard places, or why is he going into the ocean to get to the other side? Because this story can't take place on the so on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, where Capernaum would have been, and kind of the normal stomping grounds of Jesus. And I think that's a really interesting insight about when you know that Mishnah in Bava Kama exists, you say that, wow, it must be if we want a pig story, we have to go elsewhere. And we'll talk about why a pig story another time. So that's one point, which I think is very interesting. But if I say to you, this would probably be such a foreign question for you, Isaac. Is Jesus allowed to leave Israel?
Yeah, I'm in the circle back. I was taken back by your earlier question as to is he
Why
allowed
not,
to
right?
leave Israel? I would think so, yes. But just again, it's a question it's something which perplexes me that Jesus, if you want to get his message across, he did not make any attempt to leave Judea, Samaria, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Galilee. Like he
Jesus
didn't.
is no Paul, right?
Yeah, that's right. He's the opposite of Paul, right? But if he wanted to, he could have traveled. But I get the impression he did not take any. Again, there was no interest on his part um, to leave that region, and so I've always wondered about that, but I don't have
So
a good answer
So I'm
why.
not, so you're asking, you're noting a philosophical question. I'm going to deal with more of a legalistic question. Philosophically, I think it's a great point. How much did Jesus view it was his job to be evangelical in the sense of spreading the good word? It seems to me the main thing is he attracts people. He sends them away sometimes. Sometimes he interacts with them, but it doesn't seem like in the sense of an evangelical Christian who's going onto like a campus or going to Africa or Asia in like as they did in the late 1800s and the early in the 19th century and in the early 20th century to kind of spread the good word. We don't really see that as like a thing that Jesus does for the most part. And I think as a Christian who wants to spread the gospel and spread the kingdom of heaven, knowledge of the kingdom of heaven, it's a good question about why Jesus doesn't do that. So I'm not going to address that because that's a good philosophical question. It might be has to do about how Jesus sees himself in the aftermath of John the Baptist and what happened to him, how he understands what it means to be a rogue Jew, how he understands it means to be part and parcel of the community while also on the outskirts. There's so many cultural, philosophical, and identity issues involved with Jesus that it would probably be hard to parse out all the different elements. But I want to read you some more Talmudic texts just to put it in perspective. So the Talmud in Avodah Zarah 13a says, a person is never allowed to leave the country of Israel, ever, except for two reasons. One, to get married. So we're going to say a big X for Jesus over there. And number two, to go and learn Torah, because that's like a better rabbi. So what's interesting from a Talmudic perspective, Israel is the place to be. If you leave Israel, it has to be for a definitive, very concrete reason. So even when you get to the medieval times and rabbis try to explain, Nachmanides, Ramban, who lived in the 13th century, he says there's a rule in the Torah. The rule in the Bible says you have to settle the land of Israel. By definition, when you leave Israel, you're not settling the land of Israel, and therefore you're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave. Rashbam, another very famous rabbi, he explained in Baba Basra on 981b that there's a rule that you're not allowed to, I guess, throw off the yoke of commandments. When you live in Israel, there's hundreds of additional rules that apply to you. And when you leave Israel, they don't apply to you. So what I find interesting is to note for you, doesn't seem, or at least the evangelist, the author of Matthew, doesn't seem very concerned about that. It could be they viewed the other side of the water still part of Israel, but why is Jesus not concerned about leaving? And I wanted to, yeah, sorry, would you like to say something?
So you gave two reasons why a person could leave, either for marriage or to meet a rabbi. And now both of these don't apply to Jesus, or at least in this case, there's no evidence of any of those.
Right.
So that means is he disobeying the
So
Talmud?
again, we always have to talk about different time periods. These texts are sometimes written. I compare it to the rabbinic tradition what Jesus is doing. So you can't say definitively that Jesus would have agreed with what we're saying. We're trying to present a cultural context, saying that there would have been Jews at that time period who would have felt that way already. We can't say definitively that Jesus felt that way. I think he would have been aware of it. And I think the fact that the Matthean community, when they wrote verse 828, and they say that he went on, it wasn't something that they were concerned about. So I want to present to you maybe a reason that something that you would find interesting that maybe to be concerned about. So you mentioned to me before about Abraham. So one of the questions that people have about Abraham that you were noting already is that when Abraham left the land of Canaan
Hmm.
and he ran away from famine and starvation in order to go down to Egypt and he came out of Egypt very wealthy. Was he either disobeying God? Was he not trusting in God's promise? And I don't want we could talk about that another time, but I think the idea that he left Israel is meaningful when God said, go to Canaan, go to Israel. And also Jacob. Jacob also went down to Egypt. Rashi, the medieval commentator from the 11th century, he notes that Isaac was the only one who didn't leave Israel, didn't leave the land of Canaan. And he actually sees philosophical or metaphysical import, theological import in the fact that he did not leave. So, for example, if I ask you, Isaac, when Abraham sent Eliezer in Genesis to go find a wife for Isaac, if you were in Abraham's position, would you have sent your slave or would you have sent your son to go find a wife? It almost strikes you as so weird. He goes, find a woman and bring her back, and it'll work out. He'll marry her, and that'll be the foundation of the Israelite people. It's almost absurd that Isaac is not sent himself. So Rashi notes Eliezer went instead of Isaac. Isaac, when he was having a famine, when he's having trouble, he was about to leave Israel, and God's like, you can't leave Israel. So there's a note in Jewish tradition that Isaac is inherently different than Abraham and Jacob, and that Abraham and Jacob were allowed to leave the land of Israel, at least, are not forbidden from leaving, where Isaac is not. And generally, the sense that we have of why he's not is because Isaac is inherently different than Abraham and Jacob. And the reason that Rashi cites is because he was a offering.
Hmm.
Isaac was brought, or at least attempted to be brought as an offering on Mount Moriah. And Bereishit Rabbah 64:3 says if you leave the land of Israel, you're disqualified as an offering. And because he's called a pure offering, Isaac, therefore he cannot leave the land of Israel. And this shows up in many other different ways that his life is inherently different than the other patriarchs because he has an obligation to be pure or to have this status as an offering in a way that Abraham and Jacob do not. So what I found this interesting is because we talked about a couple of weeks ago or a little more that about how Jesus in many ways could be viewed as a Noah character. So I
Hmm.
wanted to show you parallels about how Jesus is both an Isaac character, not you, Isaac Stephen Raj, the other Isaac, the patriarch Isaac. You're not there yet, Isaac. Also, he's a new Isaac patriarch, but he's also an Isaac patriarch and not an Isaac patriarch. So if you're a Christian and I tell you, Isaac Stephen Raj, tell me how the patriarch Isaac is like Jesus. I think there's a standard answer. Do you have anything at the top of your head?
Well, yeah, I mean, the point is that Isaac was sacrificed on the altar, Jesus was sacrificed, but in that case, the God provided for a lamb, for a lamb, God miraculously provided for a lamb. And so I think Christianity typically draws these broad conclusions or these broad, they kind of see these broad similarities that, so it's not about Isaac, but it's about Abraham, that the Abraham was a father of faith. He wouldn't offer sacrifice, but God intervened. But in the case of God's son, Jesus, God did not intervene, that he was sacrificed. And so I think it was less in the context of Isaac, but more as Abraham being, the promise was made to Abraham, and this is what, here's how God intervened here, but God didn't intervene here. But I think, yeah, anyway, so that's some of those are some broad similarities Christianity
Right.
sees.
And I think any Christian would be able to make some broad strokes. And I think Christians will generally see Jesus' sacrifice of himself as the definitive offering for sin on earth. And generally, Christians, Christian theology will say there's no more need for a temple or for offerings or for sacrifice because Jesus' sacrifice was the ultimate sacrifice. So we
Right.
see that the two people who were sacrificed in Judaism, we still Judaism, right? In Judaism were Jesus and Isaac. Of course, we have some other examples of people who were probably sacrificed, but not in this kind of ritualistic offering way. But I think when you look at Jesus and Isaac, there's a lot more parallels. Um, They were both, and I'm going to view this from a Christian tradition, not from a Jewish, but Isaac and Jesus were both like the quote unquote the favorite child, or what we call the begotten son, which the special son, because it doesn't necessarily means the only, but means the chosen one. That's a good way to say it. Chosen son. They are both named by God, as we see in the New Testament and in we see in Genesis. They are both loved, quote unquote, by their fathers. Jesus, from a Christian perspective, by God, and in Jewish tradition by Abraham. But then you see they were offered up as complete sacrifices of their life. They were accompanied by people when they went out to sacrifice. And the list could go on. Even like one of the most famous ones is that when they were going up the mountain, Abraham and Isaac, uh, Isaac was holding some wood, and Jesus obviously was holding a lot of wood. And I think that there's a purposeful connection that we see Isaac as this perfect sacrifice. What we say in Hebrew, a olah tamima, a perfect sacrifice, and Jesus a lot of times is viewed in that way as well. So with that in mind, I think those comparisons, those parallels are important to note how far they go and where they stop where Jesus, a lot of the times in his life, he doesn't act as a sacrifice, where rabbinic tradition views Isaac as someone who has to fulfill this sacrifice element throughout his life. Jesus does not. Jesus is still allowed to kind of have certain vicissitudes in life, to go in ways that we would not consider a sacrifice. And I think we could understand verse 828 in that light. If I asked you, why can Jesus leave Israel when we see there's a rabbinic tradition not to, where we see there's a biblical commandment to settle land, where we see that Isaac was not allowed to because he was a pure sacrifice? The answer is like Jesus is never viewed his whole life as a sacrifice. His whole life he's viewed as a mentor, a teacher, a prophet, a visionary, you know, um, and lots of different other adjectives that we say, but he's not viewed as a sacrifice his whole life. The sacrifice that he does is more viewed as the end of his life. And I think that's one of the differences that between him and Isaac, that you can't view Jesus' sacrifice as one that's really taking place his whole life. And I think this is something that we talk about the whole time. When we talk about the biography of Jesus, it's hard to understand where Jesus starts and what the time and memorial perspective of Jesus ought to be. Should every single thing that Jesus be learned from? We had one of the things that we discussed is a lot of times that Jesus acts non-Jesus like. And what that means to me is that we have certain assumptions about how Jesus should act, or even certain things that Jesus says, and then he kind of doesn't act that way or speak that way more specifically. We're able to list some of the ways he speaks. And I think that has to be taken into account that the biography of Jesus is written after he's dead, where he's already the sacrifice, and yet we see the life of Jesus equally. And this is something that we don't necessarily see of Isaac. Isaac, a lot of times, is viewed as that olat tamima, that perfect sacrifice. And therefore, we don't really see those intricacies, the vicissitudes, the ups and downs of Isaac's life in the same way that we see in the life of Jesus.
Rabbi, that is so. Are you saying in some ways that Jesus was the new Isaac? We've seen Jesus as a new
We're
Moses.
gonna get him to parallel every single biblical character you could find by then.
But on the other side, right? Can I throw this back at you, right? So, um, did the author also mean to say that Jesus? So earlier part was about the seas and the ocean, and something dramatic happens. This 28 and 32 onwards, it involves pigs, which is completely unthinkable for the Jewish audience. Was in some ways also to drive a bigger point, a bigger narrative, as in the early one of Jesus coming seas is dramatic. And this is again Jesus moving into non-Jewish territory to dealing with pigs can be very dramatic. I mean, I can only imagine how the audience. I can't imagine how the audience might have felt with all this.
I think about that sometimes, about not only the pigs but the demons themselves. A lot of times, every single demon possession or demon interaction that we've seen so far in the New Testament has been focused on possession and kind of Jesus getting rid of that demon, but we don't really see them do anything militant, aggressive. It's not scary necessarily. And I wonder if one of the reasons that these two guys are scary. These guys are like zombie-like possessed, and they're talking and they want things. And I think that when we view this, one of the reasons this also maybe takes place outside of Judea or the Galilee is because we don't want two demons coming out of tombs in Israel. The idea of two demons coming out of tombs, it says they were so fierce that no one could pass that way. So I don't know exactly what that means, but it sounds like they would attack you, right? That's what I assume. And I think that's very scary. And scary things like that, we want to take place to the other. So the people on the other side of the quote unquote, literally on the other side of the river, on the other side of the railroad tracks. And I wonder, what would it mean to have a fight with these people? You know, when we see like Jacob have a fight with an angel where it strikes his sciatic nerve and pops his hip out of place, we're never scared for Jacob. We always feel like he's fighting and it's an angel or it's a person, but he's going to be victorious and it's fine. It doesn't feel. But when you see here, it's not only that Jesus interacts with two demons, they literally are coming out of tombs. And I guess as a Christian, maybe you have like a positive attitude towards coming out of tombs. Like a Jew never hears that phrase. Like as a Christian, I feel like you hear like, well, Jesus came out of the tomb. That's one of the proofs, and everyone knew. That's like if you go to people who want to argue for the historical Jesus, they'll say, well, the tomb was empty. That's one of the three major proofs for Jesus, the truth of his messiahship. So for Jews, when they hear he came out of his tomb, I hope you ran the other way. That's crazy. That's scary. That's horrible. You see some guy come out of his tomb, I don't care if he's resurrected or not, you run because that is
Right.
scary.
Yeah.
And I feel like the connotation that Jews have when they read this is scare, and therefore that fear has to come from the other side of the river. And again, they were so fierce that no one could pass. It sounds like he was haunting them. He was haunting the pagans at that time or whoever lived over there. And it's something that Jesus is coming to quote unquote save or offer salvation to the non-Jews right here in a Pauline sense, where he's coming and fixing their situation that they couldn't fix themselves. Let's say Jesus didn't calm the storm and didn't cross the river. What would have happened to these these two demons?
Demons.
Would they have just stayed there? Would and
Could
it's
they
like
have
and the
them
end of the story, did the people like just like we know this is like Jesus' tagline, but did they appreciate what he did? We skip all the way to verse 34. Then the whole town came out to meet Jesus. Sounds good. It sounds like they're gonna put him up on their shoulders and praise him and say he's great. And when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. Like the classic ending
so,
that we would expect. Yeah.
yes, Rabbi, so one last question. So the people in 34, right? They're all Gentiles. They're not Jewish people, right? Because this
No,
happened.
it doesn't say. I assume that, but Jews did live on the other side of the river as well. I feel like this story has all the hallmarks, as I noted, of being a non-Jewish population. But if someone told me to swear to it, I'd be like, well, there might be some Jews floating about. I don't know.
Maybe on that note, we can stop. I know you have to run, Rabbi. Great to see you. Have a
Okay.
great day. Thank you.